I hope you're all settled in and taking care of yourself and as prepped as much as possible for the incoming cyclone. I thought now was actually a really good time to follow up on some of the comments that I've had on the video suggesting that people prep that I did yesterday, and at least one weird comment that was sent to me that kind of feeds into this video in particular. There's comments like this one from Hippo about the lack of damage from past cyclones. Oh no, another cyclone warning. I recall when the other cyclones hit, they caused so much damage. Not. So a couple of things here. Before Vaianu, the last cyclone that actually made it here was Tam in 2025, about a year ago actually. The storm surge from Tam killed 5 people in Australia, 8,700 people lost power in Northland, Auckland and Northland flooded, and there were 750 lightning strikes in Auckland, and 175 emergency callouts. The Coromandel was briefly isolated because of flooding. Flights and ferries were cancelled while 160 km/h winds hit the country. But the media coverage on Tam was actually about traffic chaos because it was going to hit around Easter weekend. Before Tam, though, there was Cyclone Gabriel, 14 people dead, $14 billion in damage and repairs, some of which, 3 years later, still isn't repaired. And in 2022, we were actually hit by 2 cyclones, or ex-cyclones. There was ex-cyclone Cody and ex-cyclone Dovie. Hamilton City Council reported $1 million in damages alone from Dovie for trees falling down and streetlights needing repairs, and Wellington ended up with a number of landslides, while one person died in Cody, which coincided with the Tonga eruption, and so it caused what we call a double surge effect, which led to a heap of damage to marinas and coastal areas in the far north and Tutukaka, and extreme crop damage in Gisborne and Tairāwhiti. So yes, cyclones cause damage even if you don't see it. Then there's this one from what I think might have been somebody having a stroke. Sean Plummer called out climate change muppet Dr. Mawera Karatai about proof and stats that prove climate change, and she couldn't produce anything, laughing face emojis. So the only Sean Plummer that I could find that works in media is a freelance writer for Rue Morgue magazine in Canada, and I couldn't find any interviews that he did with climate expert Dr. Karatai. I did find her interview with Sean Plunkett, which was painful, but that's because he was demanding for her to talk to his ideology and not the project specifically that she was told that she was going to be talking about, and his ideology involves something to do with climate change being woke and therefore bad. But the next comment says, climate change has been proven wrong. It's called cyclonic climate. If you look throughout history, we have had weather events for centuries. Maybe do some more research before commenting you clearly know nothing about. And it came from the same commentator. So I'm sure, and of course I can't speak directly for her, but if Dr. Karatai hadn't been ambushed, she would have pointed to things like this NASA graph showing the level of atmospheric carbon measurements over millennia and how that shows the unprecedented rate of change, or graphs like this one that show that the ice shelf yearly minimum is decreasing over decades, or maps like this that show that ice shelf melting rate, or data like this one from NIWA that shows that we in New Zealand have seen an average land temperature increase of 1.1 degree a year over the last century. Well, actually longer than a century, since 1909 when we got our first really accurate results. And that's increased exponentially over the last 30 years. Or this data set from NASA that measures the average global land temperature and its difference with the average shoreline temperature globally since the 1850s and shows global warming trends. And she would have probably pointed out that cyclical climate is a simplified myth for dum-dums because it deliberately minimizes the increased impact of weather patterns. So yes, we may have been hit by 5 cyclones in 6 years, showing that there is a repeated pattern of cyclones happening, but the amount of moisture in Gabriel was significantly more than the amount of moisture in Dovie. Peak 24-hour rain measurements for Dovie was 150 to 200 millimeters, which is about a month's worth of rain for the Hawke's Bay. While for Gabriel, it was 546 millimeters, so almost 3 times as much moisture. The power of the impact is where we see climate change cause the most damage. And when it comes to the likes of Vaianu, unlike Gabriel, which was a slow, stalled system, this is a fast-moving one, meaning it can travel further before dissipating the atmospheric river that it's dragging over already saturated ground that we've got now after a summer of extreme weather events. The risk increases to the level of damaged ground that we can expect, which increases the risk to human life. Then finally, there was this weird tweet from Nick Mowbray calling for the commercialization of Radio New Zealand. Now, one of ACT's biggest donors and a billionaire who so loves the country he set up his factories in China, then got upset when he had tariffs on his products put in place by a president he supported. Mowbray here is calling for the end of RNZ as a not-for-profit state broadcaster, and there's a lot of issues with that from a media and news integrity perspective. Just look at the Herald to see how commercial news outlets changes what it considers newsworthy for clicks. But RNZ is also funded to provide emergency responses under something called a Lifeline utility in the Civil Defence Act. So they are required to remain functional in a disaster to support those that need it. And they saw funding increases in 2023 to make sure that they could do this after we saw the impacts of Cyclone Gabriel. They're the main link to the National Emergency Management Agency in the Beehive bunker, and their app has been designed specifically to handle massive traffic spikes without crashing, so that when people need updates quickly because of a really quickly changing emergency scenario, they can get them. Even when National was gutting the Climate Emergency Response Fund in 2024, they weren't dumb enough to cut funding for this service and its peripheries like Radio New Zealand's dedicated AM transmission gear. So let me be really clear here, okay? When it comes to this or any predicted weather event, listen to the experts. Don't listen to unqualified reckons who don't seem to grasp science, technology, history, or why we have experts. Listen to emergency services and find people whose job it is to keep you and your whānau safe in tough times to get advice from. And that goes for me as well. I hope that there's people who see this and go, cool, let's prepare just in case. But I'm not going to be upset if those same people were busy listening to RNZ instead and hearing the same advice. And if RNZ said anything that contradicted me, listen to the experts. Ultimately, no matter what happens this weekend, no one wants to see people hurt, property damaged, or especially a loss of life. And it's always a good idea to be prepared for the worst case scenario anyway. So why not use this as a good time to check that you are prepared? Oh, hey there, podcast listeners. Thanks for checking out today's podcast, whether that's on video or audio. I really appreciate it. And I did finally get around to doing a podcast end tag, which I've been meaning to do for a while instead of just taking you onto the Facebook version. So while you're here, why not hit that subscribe button so that you can get updates coming in directly every time there's a new episode uploaded. Just seems like a really simple way to keep up to date with all of the crazy that's going on. So yeah, give that a shot and I'll talk to you soon.